Picture this. Every third person you knew is dead. The streets reek of corpses, and somewhere in the shadows, they said, women were brewing death itself. But did witches really summon the Black Death, or was something far more sinister at play? This is how medieval witches became the scapegoats for history's deadliest plague. What invisible menace stalked the continent before the rats even landed? By 1315, Europe was already a tinderbox of suffering. The Great Famine had ravaged the land for 7 brutal years, leaving skeletal figures wandering barren fields where wheat once swayed. Feudal lords could no longer protect their serfs from starvation, and the very foundations of medieval society crumbled like rotting timber. In this world of desperate hunger, the Church's rigid dogma clashed violently with ancient folk beliefs. Priests preached that suffering was God's will, but starving peasants whispered of older remedies. Herbs gathered under moonlight, charms spoken in forgotten tongues. Village-wise women, the keepers of this forbidden knowledge, found themselves walking an increasingly dangerous line between salvation and suspicion. The learned men of the age spoke fearfully of miasma, poisonous vapors that drifted on the wind, carrying disease and death. They described it as a living thing, a malevolent breath that could seep through walls and poison entire cities. But if this invisible killer truly floated free through the air, who possessed the dark power to command it? Chronicles from the period tell of ominous portents that terrified both noble and commoner alike. Blood-red comets blazed across the sky. Earthquakes split cathedral stones. Wells ran dry, and those that didn't turned strange colors. Fish died in massive numbers, their silver bodies carpeting riverbanks like scattered coins. The very earth seemed to rebel against its inhabitants. In monasteries, scribes recorded strange testimonies from travelers. They spoke of women seen at crossroads at midnight, stirring cauldrons that bubbled with unnatural smoke. Some claimed to witness these figures casting handfuls of dark powder into the wind, muttering incantations in languages that predated Christ himself. Whether these accounts held truth or were born of terror-addled minds, they planted seeds of suspicion that would soon bloom into deadly accusations. The feudal system, already weakened by famine and social upheaval, began to fracture entirely. Traditional healers who had once been tolerated, even respected, now found themselves viewed with growing unease. Their knowledge of herbs that could heal or harm made them both invaluable and dangerous. The same hands that delivered babies and treated fever were now suspected of brewing something far more sinister. But if miasma floated free, who could possibly command it? How did the healers who mixed life-saving balms become accused of bottling death? In every village across medieval Europe, there lived women who dwelt at the crossroads between life and death. These were the midwives who caught newborns in their weathered hands, the herb women who knew which roots could break a fever and which could stop a heart forever. Their knowledge ran deeper than any monastery library. They understood the secret language of plants, how wormwood could expel parasites, how yarrow could stem bleeding, how mandrake's twisted root could ease the agony of childbirth or send a soul into eternal sleep. This wisdom had been passed down through generations of women, whispered from mother to daughter in the shadows of cottages that reeked of drying herbs and smoking cauldrons. But the Church had begun to view this ancient knowledge with increasing suspicion. The Canon Episcopi, written centuries earlier, had already warned against women who claimed to ride through the night with the goddess Diana, flying on the backs of beasts to secret gatherings. These night flights were dismissed as delusions, but the seed of fear had been planted. If women could dream of such ungodly journeys, what might they be capable of when awake? Village healers occupied a precarious position in medieval society. They were summoned when children burned with fever, when mothers labored in difficult births, when plague boils erupted on tender skin. Yet, their very effectiveness made them suspect. How could an untrained woman succeed where learned physicians failed? The answer, whispered in church corridors, was that they must draw their power from diabolic sources. The first accusations emerged not from plague itself, but from the crop failures that preceded it, when fields of grain withered for no apparent reason, when apple trees bloomed out of season only to bear poisoned fruit. Fingers pointed toward the wise women. They were accused of practicing weather magic, commanding storms to destroy harvests, summoning unseasonable frost to kill livestock, cursing the very soil to reject seeds. These women walked a razor's edge between reverence and revulsion. A successful healing might earn them a coin or a basket of bread, but a patient's death could transform them overnight from village savior to village destroyer. Their knowledge of poisons made them powerful, but it also made them terrifying. Everyone knew that the same woman who could brew a love potion could just as easily concoct a death draft. The church's growing paranoia found fertile ground in communities already ravaged by famine and social chaos. Clerical authorities began to question why God would grant such profound healing abilities to women, creatures they viewed as naturally weak and morally corrupt. The only logical explanation, they reasoned, was that these powers came from Satan himself. In the years before the plague's arrival, testimonies began to surface of women gathering at midnight crossroads, stirring cauldrons that bubbled with unnatural vigor. Witnesses claimed to see them casting mysterious powders into wells, chanting in tongues that predated Christianity. These accounts, whether born of genuine observation or fevered imagination, created a mythology of malevolent sisterhood that would soon prove deadly. The wise women themselves seemed to sense the changing winds. Some retreated deeper into forests and marshlands, practicing their craft in shadows and silence. Others attempted to align themselves more closely with Christian doctrine, claiming their healing powers came from prayer rather than plant lore. But such precautions would prove futile when the ships from the east brought their terrible cargo to European shores. Then the ships from the east arrived, and suspicion exploded. Why did Strasbourg's council condemn a secret coven before they blamed the fleas? The year was 1347, and death sailed into the Mediterranean with the calm efficiency of a merchant vessel. The ships that limped into the ports of Messina and Genoa carried more than silk and spices. They brought passengers who gasped their last breaths, even as dock workers tied the moorings. Within hours, the pestilence had leaped from ship to shore like a hungry beast finally freed from its cage. The speed of infection defied all natural law. One day, a man haggled over grain prices in the market square. The next, he lay writhing in agony, black boils erupting across his flesh like unholy fruit. Entire neighborhoods fell silent within a week. The familiar rhythms of medieval life, church bells, market calls, children's laughter, were replaced by an endless dirge of death carts rumbling over cobblestones. Civic panic seized Europe's cities with iron claws. Magistrates and mayors, trained to deal with thieves and tax disputes, found themselves governing graveyards. Traditional explanations crumbled under the weight of mass mortality. This was no ordinary illness that physicians could comprehend or priests could explain through divine punishment. Something far more sinister was at work. In Basel, the first accusations emerged before the plague's true nature was understood. City councilors spoke in hushed tones of wells that had been poisoned, of strangers seen dropping mysterious substances into public fountains under cover of darkness. But the strangers they suspected were not always foreign merchants or enemy spies. Increasingly, fingers pointed toward the women who had always dwelt at society's margins. The herb gatherers, the midwives, the keepers of ancient secrets. The terror in Valais began with a single denunciation. A dying merchant claimed to have witnessed women meeting at crossroads, grinding strange powders that glowed with sickly light. He described how they cast these substances into the wind, watching with satisfaction as the particles drifted toward unsuspecting villages. His fevered testimony, delivered with the authority of approaching death, ignited a firestorm of suspicion that would consume hundreds of lives. Chronicles from the period paint a picture of communities consumed by paranoid terror. The Strasbourg Chronicle records how city fathers ordered the arrest of those women who traffic with demons and spread pestilence through their unholy arts. Before they understood that rats and fleas were the true vectors of disease, before they recognized the bacterium Yersinia pestis as their enemy, they had already identified their scapegoats. The intersection of plague panic with existing anti-Jewish violence created a perfect storm of hatred. Jewish communities, already persecuted and isolated, found themselves accused of collaborating with witches in a grand conspiracy against Christian Europe. The myth emerged of a diabolic alliance, Jews providing the gold to purchase poisons, witches providing the knowledge to brew them. Both groups, already marginalized and feared, became lightning rods for a society's desperate need to assign blame. But the witch accusations carried a unique horror. Unlike Jews, who were at least recognized as a distinct religious community, accused witches were often neighbors, healers, women who had lived among their accusers for decades. The plague transformed familiar faces into masks of evil. The midwife who had delivered your children became the crone who cursed your family. The herb woman who had eased your mother's pain became the poisoner who brought death to your door. Medieval chroniclers recorded testimonies that would chill the blood. Women were said to gather at crossroads when the moon bleeds red, stirring cauldrons filled with black oils that bubble without fire. Witnesses claimed to see them casting handfuls of dark powder into the wind while chanting words that made listeners' ears burn. Whether these accounts reflected genuine rituals or the fevered hallucinations of a terrorized populace, they became accepted truth in courts of law. The plague's relentless advance seemed to confirm every paranoid suspicion. How else could disease travel so quickly from city to city, striking with such devastating precision? Natural explanations felt inadequate in the face of such overwhelming catastrophe. The idea that invisible women possessed the power to command pestilence offered a terrifying but comprehensible narrative for an incomprehensible horror. The hunt for culprits now had teeth, and the Inquisition supplied them. What did torture records reveal about plague potions brewed beneath a blood moon? The Inquisition had been waiting for this moment for over a century. When Pope Gregory IX issued the papal bull Vox in Rama in 1233, he had declared war on devil-worshipping cults across Europe. Now, as the Black Death ravaged the continent, inquisitors saw their darkest warnings vindicated. The plague wasn't just divine punishment. It was proof of an active satanic conspiracy. The torture chambers of medieval Europe became factories of confession. Inquisitorial manuals, refined through decades of heresy trials, provided detailed instructions for extracting the truth from suspected witches. The process was methodical, almost scientific in its approach to breaking the human spirit. Victims were stripped, searched for devil's marks, then subjected to escalating torments until they revealed the secrets of their diabolic craft. The confessions that emerged from these sessions painted a remarkably consistent picture of plague-brewing covens. Accused women described gathering at crossroads during eclipses, when the moon turned the color of dried blood. They spoke of stirring cauldrons filled with toad's blood, bat wings, and the ground bones of unbaptized infants. Most tellingly, they confessed to creating pestilence powders, dark substances that could be scattered on the wind to carry death to distant cities. The testimonies revealed intricate details about demonic familiars. Cat spirits, particularly black ones, were said to guide witches in their poisonous arts. These supernatural creatures allegedly taught women how to distill plague essence from rotting corpses, how to preserve the contagion in small leather pouches, and how to release it at the most opportune moments. The familiars were described as speaking in voices like grinding stone, their eyes glowing with hellfire, as they whispered instructions for maximizing human suffering. Records from Toulouse in 1335 describe the burning of 7 women accused of brewing plague potions in advance of the epidemic. Their confessions, extracted through the application of red-hot iron and the strappado, detailed a conspiracy spanning decades. They claimed to have been preparing for the great pestilence since the time of their grandmothers, slowly accumulating the ingredients and knowledge necessary to unleash hell on earth. The Cologne trials of 1357 revealed even more elaborate accusations. Surviving court documents describe women who allegedly maintained plague nurseries, hidden chambers where they cultivated disease and captured rats and fleas. These facilities were said to be blessed by Satan himself, places where normal laws of nature were suspended. The accused confessed to feeding these creatures on consecrated hosts stolen from churches, turning the body of Christ into food for the agents of apocalypse. The gendered nature of these accusations reflected deep-seated medieval anxieties about female power and sexuality. Inquisitors were particularly interested in extracting confessions about Sabbath gatherings where witches allegedly mated with demons to produce plague-bearing offspring. These supernatural children were described as being born fully formed, with the immediate ability to spread pestilence through their mere presence. Terror tactics employed during trials specifically targeted women's roles as mothers and healers. Accused witches were forced to confess that they had murdered their own children in satanic rituals, that they had poisoned patients who trusted them, that they had used their knowledge of herbs not to heal but to harm. The psychological torture was as devastating as the physical, destroying not just their bodies, but their very identity as nurturing caregivers. The confession patterns revealed a sophisticated understanding of how disease spread, knowledge that was then attributed to diabolic revelation. Accused women described how plague spirits traveled on the wind, how they could be concentrated in enclosed spaces, how they multiplied rapidly in warm, humid conditions. This accurate understanding of contagion, remarkable for its time, was interpreted as proof of supernatural assistance rather than keen observation. Inquisitorial records from this period also revealed the brutal efficiency of the confession process. Torture sessions were carefully calibrated to extract maximum information while keeping victims alive long enough to validate their testimonies publicly. The goal was not merely punishment, but education. Each burning served as a lesson to communities about the reality of diabolic conspiracy and the need for constant vigilance. The geographical spread of these trials followed trade routes and communication networks, suggesting that accusations were actively shared between inquisitorial authorities. What began as isolated incidents of plague scapegoating evolved into a coordinated campaign of persecution that would define witch hunting for centuries to come. Yet the disease returned, deadlier, and fear demanded stronger legal chains. How did lawmakers turn epidemics into a perpetual witch-finding machine? The plague's return in 1361 shattered any illusion that the first wave had been God's singular judgment. This second outbreak, known grimly as the Children's Plague for its devastating toll on the young, struck with renewed fury. When death visited again in 1374, then 1390, then with clockwork regularity every few decades, European authorities faced a terrifying truth. The pestilence was not a divine punishment to be endured, but a recurring catastrophe that demanded permanent vigilance. Secular lawmakers, no longer content to leave witch hunting to the church, began crafting statutes that formally linked pestilence with sorcery. The legal machinery of the state transformed from a tool of justice into an engine of perpetual suspicion. Laws emerged that made it a capital crime to conjure diseases upon man or beast, to corrupt the air with diabolic vapors, or to consort with demons for the purpose of spreading contagion. The 1428 Valais trials marked a turning point in the legal persecution of plague witches. Unlike earlier inquisitorial proceedings, these trials were conducted under secular authority with the backing of civil law. The accused were not just heretics to be burned, but criminals whose crimes against public health demanded the full weight of legal retribution. The surviving court records reveal a systematic approach to identifying and prosecuting those responsible for manufacturing pestilence through infernal arts. What made these later trials particularly deadly was their integration of folk beliefs with legal precedent. Village rumors about women who could command disease were now admissible evidence in courts of law. Hearsay testimony about midnight gatherings and poison brewing became the foundation for death sentences. The legal system, designed to protect the innocent, became a weapon for destroying the vulnerable. The publication of the Malice Maleficarum in 1487 weaponized plague mythology with devastating effectiveness. This inquisitorial manual, written by Heinrich Kramer and Jakob Sprenger, devoted entire chapters to the connection between witchcraft and disease. It provided legal authorities with detailed instructions for identifying plague witches, extracting confessions, and ensuring that justice was both swift and public. The manual's influence spread far beyond Catholic territories, shaping Protestant witch-hunting practices for generations. The Malleus described plague witches as part of a vast conspiracy against Christian civilization. According to its authors, these women had been specifically chosen by Satan to serve as generals in his war against humanity. Their mission was not merely to kill, but to corrupt the very fabric of society by making survival itself seem impossible. The manual provided judges with theological justification for increasingly brutal interrogation methods, arguing that the eternal salvation of entire communities hung in the balance. Maritime trade networks carried these legal innovations across national boundaries with the same efficiency that had once spread the plague itself. The North Berwick witch trials of 1590 in Scotland demonstrated how plague-related accusations could be adapted to local circumstances. The accused were charged with attempting to sink King James VI's ship through storm magic, but underlying testimonies revealed familiar patterns of disease brewing and poison-making that had been refined through centuries of continental witch hunting. The Scottish trials revealed how plague mythology had evolved to encompass new forms of biological warfare. Accused witches confessed to creating pest ships, vessels deliberately infected with plague and sent to enemy ports. They described techniques for concentrating contagion in small containers that could be smuggled into enemy cities, then broken open to release death upon unsuspecting populations. These confessions, extracted through torture, provided early modern authorities with a compelling narrative of state-sponsored biological terrorism. Legal precedents established during plague years created a framework for perpetual witch hunting that outlasted the disease itself. Courts developed standardized procedures for identifying plague witches, from the examination of suspected devil's marks to the interpretation of dying victims' final words. The legal system became a self-perpetuating machine that generated its own evidence and validated its own assumptions. The transformation of epidemic response into legal persecution had profound implications for European society. Medical knowledge stagnated as physicians focused on identifying supernatural causes rather than natural ones. Public health measures were subordinated to the hunt for human scapegoats. The very concept of contagion became entangled with notions of moral corruption and diabolic influence, creating intellectual barriers that would persist for centuries. By the late medieval period, plague-related witch laws had become so embedded in legal systems that they operated independently of actual disease outbreaks. The machinery of persecution, once activated by genuine epidemics, continued to function during periods of relative health, finding new targets and new justifications for its deadly work. Centuries later, science re-examined the very herbs that damned these women. Could the so-called witch salves have contained the first faint antidotes to Yersinia pestis? In the sterile laboratories of the 20th century, researchers made a discovery that would have horrified medieval inquisitors. The herbs that had condemned thousands of women to death, the very plants cited as evidence of diabolic conspiracy, possessed genuine antimicrobial properties that might have offered protection against plague. Modern studies of thyme, sage, and angelica revealed compounds capable of inhibiting bacterial growth. The devil's herbs that medieval authorities had banned contained thymol, camphor, and other natural antibiotics that could theoretically slow the progression of plague infection. Scientists examining recipes from confiscated grimoires found that many of these witch potions were sophisticated preparations that maximized the therapeutic potential of available plants. The retrospective irony was staggering. Women who had been burned as plague bringers may have been among the few people in medieval Europe who understood how to fight the disease. Their knowledge of herbal medicine, passed down through generations of female healers, represented a proto-scientific approach to epidemic disease that was centuries ahead of its time. The very expertise that made them valuable to their communities ultimately made them targets for destruction. Research into historical plague treatments revealed that many traditional remedies contained ingredients now known to have genuine medical efficacy. Wormwood, demonized in witch trial testimonies, contains compounds that modern medicine recognizes as antiparasitic agents. Yarrow, another devil's plant, possesses anti-inflammatory properties that could have provided genuine relief to plague victims. The complex herbal preparations that inquisitors interpreted as poison recipes were often sophisticated attempts at treating epidemic disease. The parallel between medieval plague scapegoating and modern pandemic responses proved disturbingly familiar. During the 1918 influenza pandemic, immigrant communities faced accusations of spreading disease through deliberate contamination. The COVID-19 outbreak of 2020 witnessed similar patterns of xenophobic blame, with particular ethnic groups targeted as vectors of infection. The human tendency to seek human causes for natural disasters remained constant across centuries. The gendered nature of plague scapegoating also echoed through history. Women's traditional roles as healers and caregivers made them simultaneously essential and suspect during health crises. The same pattern that had destroyed medieval wise women emerged in modern witch-hunting episodes, from the Salem trials to contemporary moral panics about female-dominated professions like nursing and midwifery. Modern epidemiologists studying historical plague outbreaks began to recognize the sophisticated observational skills that medieval healers had possessed. These women understood concepts of quarantine, recognized patterns of contagion, and developed treatment protocols based on careful observation of disease progression. Their knowledge represented a form of empirical medicine that was more advanced than the theoretical approaches favored by university-trained physicians. The moral implications of this historical reversal were profound. The witch trials had not just destroyed innocent lives, they had systematically eliminated the very people who might have helped combat the plague. By targeting healers and herb women, medieval authorities had weakened their community's ability to respond to epidemic disease. The persecution of witches represented a form of intellectual suicide that set back medical progress by centuries. The examination of surviving medieval medical texts revealed that many plague treatments attributed to learned physicians had actually been borrowed from traditional healers. The boundary between official medicine and folk healing was far more porous than inquisitorial records suggested. The knowledge that condemned women as witches was often the same knowledge that educated men used to build their medical reputations. Contemporary discussions of pandemic preparedness began to incorporate lessons from medieval plague responses, the importance of preserving traditional knowledge, the dangers of scapegoating vulnerable populations, and the need for evidence-based rather than fear-based policy decisions all emerged as crucial themes. The witch trials served as a historical warning about the consequences of allowing panic to override scientific reasoning. The rehabilitation of medieval herbalism within modern medicine represented a form of posthumous vindication for the accused witches. Their knowledge, once condemned as diabolic, was now recognized as a valuable repository of traditional healing wisdom. The plants they had cultivated in secret gardens were studied in university laboratories, their therapeutic properties validated through rigorous scientific testing. So, what truly spread faster, fleas or fear? The answer, written in the ashes of burned women and the pages of inquisitorial records, was clear. Fear had always been the deadliest contagion, and suspicion the most virulent epidemic. The real plague that devastated medieval Europe was not the disease that killed bodies, but the terror that poisoned minds and turned neighbor against neighbor in an orgy of blame and retribution. Perhaps the deadliest contagion was suspicion itself. What dark myths still lurk, ready to brand new witches when crisis strikes? If these hidden histories fascinate you, subscribe and join us in unmasking the next shadowed legend.